sun rose over West Texas like a wound opening across dirty canvas. September 1945. The war was over, but nobody had told the land. Dust still choked the air. Barbed wire still carved the horizon into pieces. And in a convoy of canvas-covered trucks rolling down Highway 8037, German women sat in silence, watching America through gaps in the fabric. They wore grey prison uniforms that had been white once, maybe in some other lifetime. Their hands were clean, but their faces were not. Some had been nurses. Some had been clerks. One had been a radio operator in Hamburg before the bombs turned the city into a furnace. Another had sorted propaganda mail in Berlin until the Russians came and the sorting stopped mattering. The youngest was 19. The oldest was 42. None of them had fired a gun, but all of them had worn the uniform of the Third Reich, and in the autumn of 1945, that was enough. The truck smelled like sweat and fear and the metallic tang of uncertainty that comes when you don't know if the next stop is a camp or a grave. No one spoke. Speaking made it real. As long as they stayed quiet, they could pretend this was just another transport, another holding facility, another temporary hell before the next one. But then the lead truck slowed, and through the gap in the canvas, one of the women, a blonde named Eleanor Fisher, who'd once dreamed of teaching children to read, saw something that made her breath catch. Horses. Dozens of them running wild across a field so vast it seemed to swallow the sky. "My God," she whispered in German. The woman beside her, Katrin Adler, a former stenographer with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, leaned closer. "Where are we?" No one answered, because no one knew. The trucks turned off the main road onto a dirt path that stretched for miles. The dust they kicked up hung in the air like a question mark. In the distance, a ranch emerged from the heat shimmer. Low buildings, wooden corrals, a windmill turning slowly against the wind. It looked like a postcard from another century. It looked like the end of the world. When the trucks finally stopped, the silence was absolute. Then boots hit the ground, American voices sharp and businesslike. The canvas was pulled back and sunlight flooded in like an accusation. "Out! Everyone out! Line up!" They climbed down, stiff-legged and wary, blinking against the brightness. The ground beneath their feet was hard-packed dirt, warm even through their thin-soled shoes. The air tasted like cattle and hay and something else, something wild that Elena couldn't name. Across from them stood a line of men, not soldiers, cowboys. They wore Stetsons and dusty jeans and shirts with pearl buttons. Their faces were sunburned and unreadable. Some chewed tobacco. One rolled a cigarette. They studied the German women the way you'd study livestock at auction. Not cruel, not kind, just assessing. At the front of the line stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same rock as the land itself. He was maybe 50, with iron-grey hair and eyes the colour of a thunderstorm. His name, they would later learn, was Silas Hartwell. He owned this ranch. He owned 40,000 acres and a reputation for being harder than the ground he walked on. He let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then he spoke. "You're probably wondering why you're here instead of in a camp with walls and guards and all the rest of it." His voice was a slow drawl, but underneath it was something harder. Truth, maybe. Or just exhaustion. "Truth is, we got a problem. War took half the ranch hands in 3 counties. Cattle still need tending. Horses still need breaking. Fields still need working. Government made us a deal. We take you on as labor. You work off your internment here instead of in some facility back east." He paused, letting that sink in. "You'll work. You'll work hard. You'll earn your keep. But you won't be locked up. You won't be beaten. You won't be starved. You follow the rules, you'll be treated fair." Another pause. "You break them." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't hope. Hope was too dangerous. But it was something adjacent to it. A loosening of the knot that had lived in her stomach for months. Then one of the cowboys stepped forward and spoke. "Before work, you eat." The words didn't make sense at first. Eleanor turned to look at the speaker. He couldn't have been more than 25, with sandy hair and a jaw that looked like it had been used for breaking rocks. His name was Walker Kane, though she wouldn't learn that until later. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd been born on horseback. "This way," he said, and turned. The 37 women followed, confused, their guards walking alongside, but not pushing, not shouting. They rounded the side of the main building and stopped. There, in the shade of an enormous cottonwood tree, was a table. A long table made of rough-cut planks, and on that table was food. Eleanor stared. Bacon, scrambled eggs, biscuits the size of a fist, coffee steaming in tin cups, butter in a ceramic dish, jam in glass jars. Real food. More food than she'd seen in 8 months. "Sit," Silas Hartwell said. "Eat. You'll need your strength." No one moved. It had to be a trick. A test. The last meal before execution, like they did in the old stories. Fatten the condemned before the slaughter. But then Katrine Adler, pragmatic as always, walked forward and sat down. She picked up a biscuit, split it open and took a bite. Her eyes closed. For a moment she looked like she might cry. That broke the spell. The others moved forward, cautious, waiting for someone to stop them. No one did. Elena sat. She stared at the plate in front of her. 6 strips of bacon, golden and glistening. 2 eggs scrambled with flecks of black pepper. A biscuit so fresh it was still warm. She picked up a strip of bacon with trembling fingers. It had been 8 months since she'd tasted meat. 8 months of watery soup and stale bread, and the kind of hunger that makes your teeth ache. 8 months since Hamburg, since the night the RAF came and turned the world into fire, since the morning she'd pulled her mother from the rubble and promised her everything would be all right. She bit into the bacon. The taste hit her like a fist. Salt first, then smoke, then the fat, rich and impossible, melting across her tongue and coating her throat like warm silk. It tasted like her father's butcher shop before the war, before the party, before everything went wrong. It tasted like Sunday mornings when she was 7 years old and the world was still safe. She ate the first piece slowly, then faster, the second piece, the third. Halfway through the fourth, she started to cry. Not sobbing, just tears, silent and unstoppable, running down her face and onto the plate. She couldn't stop them, couldn't control them. The bacon blurred in her vision, but she kept eating because if she stopped, she might never start again. Across the table, other women were crying too. Some ate, some just stared. One woman, a former nurse named Martha Adler, who was 7 months pregnant with a dead soldier's child, held a biscuit in both hands like it was something holy. Walker Kane stood at the end of the table watching. He didn't say anything. After a moment, he walked over to Elena, picked up the coffee pot and refilled her cup. Still didn't speak. Just poured, set the pot down and walked away. Elena looked down at the coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt acorn substitute they'd had in the camps. Steam rose from the cup, carrying the smell of something rich and bitter and utterly American. She thought about her mother's last letter, the one that had arrived 3 months before the mail stopped entirely. 4 sentences on thin paper written in her mother's careful hand. "We eat sawdust bread now. Little Franz next door died last week. Hunger, they said. You must stay alive, Eleanor. You must." Eleanor drank the coffee. It was hot enough to burn, and she was grateful for the pain. When the meal was finished, when every scrap had been eaten and every cup drained, Silas Hartwell stood up. "Now," he said, "we work." The 37 women stood. Some still had tears on their faces. Some looked dazed, like they'd just woken from a dream and weren't sure if reality was better or worse. Silas gestured to the men behind him. "These are your foremen. They'll teach you what needs doing. First lesson starts now." Walker Kane stepped forward. He looked at the assembled women with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Not contempt, not pity. Something else. "Any of you ever ridden a horse?" he asked. Silence. "I'll take that as a no." He turned and whistled, sharp and piercing. From the corral, a horse trotted over. a chestnut mare with intelligent eyes and a coat that gleamed like copper in the sun. "This is Rosie," Walker said, running his hand along her neck. The mare huffed her breath, visible in the morning air. "She's meaner than a rattlesnake before coffee, but she's the best teacher on this ranch." He turned back to face them. "Out here, you can't do a damn thing without a horse. Fences need checking 30 miles out. Cattle scatter across 3 valleys. You want to survive this place, you learn to ride." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. "You want to earn respect. You learn to ride well." Catherine spoke up, her English careful but clear. "And if we refuse?" Walker's expression didn't change. "Then you scrub floors and haul water and never leave sight of these buildings. Your choice." Eleanor looked at the horse. Rosie looked back. There was something in the animal's eyes that reminded her of herself. Wary, tired, but not broken. Not yet. "I'll ride," Eleanor said. The words came out stronger than she'd intended. Around her, other women murmured agreement. Not all of them. 5 shook their heads and were led away toward the main house. But 32 stayed. 32 women who'd crossed an ocean in chains, who'd expected bullets or barbed wire, who'd just eaten bacon and cried over coffee. 32 women who chose horses. They started that very afternoon. Walker divided them into groups of 5. Eleanor found herself standing in a dusty corral with 4 other women facing a horse that looked roughly the size of a locomotive. The animal's name was Cinder, a bay mare with a white blaze down her face and eyes that showed too much white. The cowboy assigned to their group was Walker himself. He spoke slowly, repeating everything twice, demonstrating with exaggerated patience. "Left foot in the stirrup. Grab the horn. Swing your right leg over. Don't kick her in the ribs unless you want to see the sky real close." The first woman to try, a quiet brunette named Liesel Brenner, who'd been a seamstress in Munich, made it exactly 3 seconds in the saddle before the horse sidestepped and she tumbled into the dirt. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. She lay there, stunned, tasting blood and dust. Walker helped her up without comment, brushed her off, and pointed at the horse again. Once more. By the end of that first day, every single one of them had fallen at least twice. Eleanor had fallen 4 times. Her tailbone was a symphony of pain. Her thighs burned. Her hands, soft from months of indoor confinement, were raw and blistered. But she'd also stayed on for almost a full minute as the horse walked in a slow circle. Just before sunset, when the sky turned the color of fire and gold, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Control. Or maybe the illusion of it. But even illusions mattered when you'd been powerless for so long. She stood at the corral fence after the lesson ended, watching Cinder. The mare watched her back. There was something in the horse's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Eleanor thought about her father, Ernst Fischer, who'd been a butcher in Hamburg before the Nazis came. He'd hidden 3 Jewish families in his cellar, rotating them every few weeks, feeding them from his own rations. Someone had informed. The Gestapo took him in 1943. She never saw him again. She thought about her mother Anna, who'd pulled her from the burning rubble of their apartment building and held her while the firestorm raged. Who'd convinced her to join the Wehrmacht because a military ration card meant survival, meant food, meant staying alive long enough to see the war end. She thought about the recruiter who'd promised purpose and safety and 3 meals a day. About all the choices that had led her here, to this ranch in Texas, to this moment. Cinder nickered softly, and Elena reached out, letting the horse smell her hand. "Tomorrow," she whispered in German. "Tomorrow, I'll do better." The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life. They woke before dawn when the air was still cool, and the stars were bright as broken glass. They worked until dark. Their bodies, softened by months of inactivity, rebelled against every movement. Muscles they didn't know they had screamed in protest. They learned to walk bow-legged, to wrap their blistered hands in cloth before pulling on the rough leather reins, to check their boots for scorpions before putting them on in the morning. The cowboys were patient but unyielding. They corrected mistakes with few words and fewer sympathies. They demonstrated endlessly how to mount, how to sit, how to post, how to turn, how to stop. They taught them the language of reins and legs and weight distribution. They taught them that a horse could feel your fear through your thighs, could read your intentions in the tension of your spine. "Stop thinking," Walker told Elena one morning when she'd frozen up, hands white-knuckled on the reins. Cinder had stopped dead in the middle of the corral, ears pinned back, sensing the panic. "Thinking makes you stiff. Stiff makes you fall. Feel the horse. Move with it, not against it." She tried. God, she tried. But every instinct screamed at her to hold on tighter, to resist the movement, to maintain control. Cinder felt the resistance and refused to move. Walker sighed. "Get down." She dismounted, expecting a lecture. Instead, he swung into the saddle in one fluid motion and walked the horse in a circle. His body moved like water, absorbing every shift of the mare's gait. He made it look like breathing. "See?" He stopped beside her. "No fighting, just conversation." He dismounted and handed her the reins again. She tried 17 more times that day. On the 18th, something clicked. Cinder moved left, and instead of bracing against it, Eleanor let her hips follow. The mare's ears flicked forward. Approval, maybe, or at least acceptance. Walker, standing at the fence, nodded once. "There you go." That tiny nod felt like a medal, but not everyone adapted. 3 of the women requested transfers to indoor work after the first week. 2 more followed after 10 days. The remaining 32 developed a grim determination that bordered on obsession. They helped each other up after falls. They compared bruises like war medals. They spoke in broken English, and the Cowboys spoke in even more broken German, and somehow gradually communication happened. Katrin Adler, the former stenographer, turned out to have a natural seat. Within 3 weeks, she was cantering her sharp mind, translating the mechanics of riding into something almost mathematical. She and Walker developed a strange rapport. He'd explain something, she'd translate it for the others, and occasionally they'd argue technique with the passion of scholars debating philosophy. Liesel Brenner, the quiet seamstress, bonded with an old paint horse named Dutch. The horse was arthritic and slow but steady, and Liesel would spend her evenings in his stall, brushing his coat and talking to him in German. The horse never understood the words, but he understood the tone. And Eleanor found something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not legal freedom. Not the freedom to leave or to go home, but something more fundamental. When she was in the saddle, riding across those vast stretches of Texas plain with the wind in her face and the sun on her back, the past couldn't touch her. The guilt couldn't reach her. The fear couldn't hold her. She was just a woman on a horse, and the horse didn't care about uniforms or flags or the bodies buried under rubble in cities she'd never see again. One afternoon in early November, Silas Hartwell rode out to where Elena and 5 others were mending a fence line. He sat his horse, a massive black stallion named Goliath, with the ease of a man who'd been riding longer than he'd been walking. He watched them work for a while, not speaking. Then, "You're getting better." Elena looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. You did the work." He shifted in the saddle leather, creaking. "Question for you. Why'd you join up the German military?" The others stopped working. The question hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's hands stilled on the wire. "I was hungry," she said finally, "and afraid, and they said if I served my father would get a ration card, a real one, not the half rations they were giving to people they didn't want." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Your father Jewish?" "No, communist." She looked up at him. "In Germany, after a while, that was the same thing." Silas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, rougher. "My son died at Normandy. Thomas. 22 years old. Never even made it off the beach." Elena's stomach dropped. She waited for the rest. The anger, the accusation, the hatred. But Silas just looked out at the horizon. "I hated every German alive for 6 months after I got the telegram. Hated you all so much I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Just sat in his room and looked at his things and thought about all the ways I could make you suffer. He paused. Then one day I'm in town and I see this woman. German immigrant, been here since the 20s. Her boys playing in the street. Must have been 8, 9 years old. What stopped you? Katrine asked quietly. The boy laughed, Silas said. Just laughed at something the way kids do. And I realized he didn't kill my son. She didn't kill my son. Hell, most of the boys who actually did kill my son were probably just as scared and hungry as you were. He looked back at Elena. Hate's easy. Hate's the easiest thing in the world, but it doesn't bring anybody back. He turned his horse and rode away, leaving them standing in the dust with the weight of his words. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in the bunkhouse, rough but clean, with real beds and wool blankets, and listened to the breathing of 31 other women who'd somehow ended up in Texas learning to ride horses instead of rotting in a prison camp. She thought about Silas's son on that beach in France. She thought about her father who'd written her exactly 3 letters before the mail stopped, and who she didn't know was alive or dead. She thought about the radio operator she'd worked beside in Hamburg, who'd had a picture of his fiancée on his desk, and who'd been killed when the RAF bombed the communications center. She thought about blame and guilt, and the impossibly tangled web of cause and effect that led to any war. And she thought about Cinder, and how sometimes when she rode her, the mare would break into a run without being asked, as if she too wanted to outrun something. December brought cold winds and the first real challenge. Silas gathered all 32 of them in the main corral one morning, along with every cowboy on the ranch. "Cattle drive," he announced. 400 head need moving from the North Range to the winter pasture. 20-mile push. We leave at dawn tomorrow. Be back by dark. Murmurs rippled through the group. 20 miles was longer than any of them had ridden. A full day in the saddle. Real cattle. Unpredictable, stubborn, potentially dangerous. "You don't have to go," Silas continued. "Anyone who wants to stay back, no judgment. But we're short-handed, and we could use you." Elena looked at Katrin. Katrin looked at Liesel. Liesel looked back at Elena. "We'll go," Elena said. All 32 volunteered. But before they could prepare, Silas held up his hand. The murmuring stopped. "One more thing," he said. His voice had changed, gone harder. "Government's changing policy. War's over, occupation's ending. Come January, they're repatriating all POWs back to Europe." The world tilted. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Unless," Silas continued, "unless you're working a critical agricultural role, I can sponsor 15 of you for permanent labor visas. The rest—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. 15 out of 32. Elena did the math instantly. Less than 50%. Less than half would stay. The rest would go back to Germany, back to the rubble, back to the starvation, back to the cities where everyone knew what you'd done, where everyone pointed fingers, where survival was a lottery and the odds were bad. "Who gets sponsored?" Katrine asked, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. Silas looked at each of them in turn. "Whoever proves they can do a ranch hand's job by Christmas. You've got 6 weeks, starting with this cattle drive." The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly, one by one, the women dispersed to prepare. Elena stood frozen for a moment. Then she walked to the corral where Cinder waited. The mare lifted her head ears forward. 6 weeks, Elena whispered. "We have 6 weeks to earn the right to stay." The horse nickered softly. Elena rested her forehead against Cinder's neck, breathing in the smell of horse and hay and dust. "I can't go back," she said. "There's nothing there. Nothing but ghosts." The drive began in pre-dawn darkness. The world reduced to the sound of hoofbeats and the low murmur of cattle. The cowboys positioned the German women on the flanks, less critical positions, but still important. Elena rode Cinder. The mare knew the work better than she did, which helped. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The cattle moved in a sluggish river of brown and black, and the horses knew to keep them grouped without much input from their riders. Elena found a rhythm. Walk, watch, adjust. Walk some more. The sun rose, painting the plains in shades of gold and amber. The air was cold enough to hurt, and her hands ached even through the gloves, but she was riding. She was useful. She was earning her place. Then a jackrabbit burst from the brush. One of the steers spooked, broke left, and suddenly half a dozen more were following. They scattered toward a ravine, picking up speed, and the cowboys were shouting and wheeling their horses, and Elena's brain went blank with panic. But Cinder didn't panic. Cinder knew what to do. The mare lunged forward without waiting for Elena's command, closing the angle on the lead steer. She cut left, right, left again, moving with impossible agility. And Elena, operating on pure instinct now, all those weeks of training bypassing thought, moved with her. She felt the shift in Cinder's shoulders and leaned. She felt the mare bunch for a turn and shifted her weight. She didn't think. She just rode. They got in front of the lead steer. Cinder half-reared, blocking the path, and the steer, confronted with 4 hooves and a wall of muscle, wheeled back toward the herd. The others followed. Eleanor's heart was hammering. Her hands were shaking, but the cattle were back with the main group. Walker was riding toward her, and there was something in his eyes that might have been respect. "Hell of a move," he called. "You okay?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "That's cutting," he said. "Takes most riders a year to learn. You just did it on instinct." He grinned. "Cinder's a good teacher." Elena reached down and patted the mare's neck, felt the warmth and the solid reality of her. "Yes," she managed. "She is." By the time they reached the winter pasture, the sun was setting again, and every muscle in Elena's body had been replaced with molten lead. But they'd done it. All 400 head moved 20 miles, and not a single animal lost. Silas rode along the line as they headed back, stopping beside each of the German women. When he reached Elena, he just nodded. But in that nod was something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Acknowledgement. Not forgiveness that wasn't his to give, but recognition that she was more than her past, more than her uniform, more than her mistakes. She was a rider. That night, back at the ranch, Walker found her in the barn. She was brushing Cinder down, working the sweat and dust from the mare's coat with long, steady strokes. "My brother James," Walker said without preamble. "He died at Anzio. German mortar shell. Found his dog tags in a crater. Nothing else." Eleanor's hands stilled on the brush. "For a year, I wanted every German I saw to hurt the way I hurt. Wanted you to know what it felt like to lose someone you loved to a war you didn't start." He was quiet for a moment. "But today, watching you save those cattle, watching you ride like you were born to it, I thought about what James would say." Eleanor turned to look at him. "He'd say, 'You've got guts,'" Walker said. "He'd say anyone who falls 4 times and gets back on 4 times is worth knowing. He'd say—" He trailed off, then started again. "My brother wanted to be a teacher, like you did. He used to say the only way to stop wars was to teach the next generation to see people instead of flags." Walker reached out and stroked Cinder's nose. The mare leaned into his hand. "I think he'd like you, Elena Fisher. And if James would like you, that's good enough for me." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the lamplight with a horse and a hope that was still too fragile to name. Christmas Eve, 1945. 6 weeks had passed since Silas's announcement. 6 weeks of riding before dawn and working until dark. 6 weeks of proving themselves, of transforming from prisoners into ranch hands. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Ice formed on the water troughs. The wind cut through layers of wool like they were paper. But Silas had promised an answer by Christmas, and Silas kept his promises. He gathered all 32 women in the main hall after dinner. The cowboys stood along the walls. On a table at the front of the room was a single sheet of paper. 15 names, 15 visas, 15 futures, 17 ghosts. Silas picked up the paper. He didn't look at it. He'd memorized the list. I'm going to read the names of those I'm sponsoring for permanent agricultural work visas, he said. If your name is called, you stay. If it's not. He didn't finish. Eleanor Fisher. Relief hit her like a blow. Her knees went weak. She sat down hard on the bench behind her. Katrin Adler. Martha Adler. The names continued. Liesl Brenner was not among them. When Silas finished reading, 17 women sat with their heads in their hands. 15 stood with tears on their faces. And Silas Hartwell, who'd lost his only son to this war, who'd chosen pragmatism over vengeance, looked older than his 50 years. Those not selected, he said quietly. You'll be transported back east after New Year's. The government will arrange repatriation from there. I'm sorry. You all worked hard, but I can only sponsor 15. He left the room. Eleanor found Liesl outside, standing by the corral in the freezing dark. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. Liesl shook her head. Don't be. I got a telegram yesterday. My mother's alive in Dresden. She needs me. She turned to Eleanor. You earned your spot. You saved those cattle. You learned to ride in 6 weeks. You deserve to stay. You could stay anyway, Eleanor said. Martha's having a baby. She might not. No, Liesl said firmly. My mother is alone. I have to go back. She smiled, and it was real. But you ride for both of us. You build a life here, and you remember that not everyone who wore that uniform was a monster. Eleanor pulled her into a hug. They stood there in the cold, 2 women who'd crossed an ocean in chains and found something in Texas they couldn't name. When they pulled apart, Liesl said, Promise me something. Anything. When you have a daughter, teach her to ride. Elena nodded, unable to speak. The women who were leaving departed on January 2nd, 1946. They loaded into the same canvas-covered trucks that had brought them, carrying the few possessions they'd accumulated. Liesl took Dutch, the old paint horse. Silas gave him to her without being asked. Eleanor stood with the 15 who remained and watched the trucks disappear into the dust. When the horizon had swallowed them, she turned to find Walker standing beside her. Ready? He asked. For what? Work, he said. Sun's up. Cattle don't feed themselves. Elena looked at him. At this man who'd lost his brother to her countrymen, who'd taught her to ride anyway, who'd chosen to see a person instead of an enemy. Yes, she said. I'm ready. They walked back toward the barn, toward the horses, toward the life she'd earned one fall at a time. Behind them the dust settled. Ahead the day's work waited, and for the first time since Hamburg burned, Eleanor Fisher felt something like peace. Winter came to Texas like a fist closing around the throat of the land. January 1946. The 15 women who remained worked harder than they'd ever worked in their lives. They had their visas, but visas were just paper. Paper could be revoked. Respect had to be earned daily in the cold dark before sunrise, in the blistering heat of noon, in the aching exhaustion of twilight. Elena learned to rope. Not well, but well enough. She learned to recognize the subtle signs of illness in cattle, the way a sick steer held its head, the dullness in its eyes. She learned to read the sky for weather, to smell rain coming 3 hours before it arrived. The other women scattered across the ranch's vast acreage, each finding their place. Katrin worked with the horses, her mathematical mind perfectly suited to breeding records and bloodlines. Martha, despite being 8 months pregnant, now insisted on light work in the main house, cooking and mending. But it was Eleanor who rode the furthest ranges with Walker and the other cowboys. Eleanor who checked fence lines 30 miles from the ranch house. Eleanor who slept under stars when the work required it, wrapped in a bedroll that smelled like horse and leather and sage. She was becoming something she'd never intended to be. Not German, not quite American. Something else. Something forged in the space between. Then February came, and with it the blizzard. It started as a whisper of wind in the early morning. By noon the sky had turned the color of old iron. By 3 in the afternoon the temperature had dropped 30 degrees and snow was falling in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. Walker gathered everyone in the main barn, 15 women, 8 cowboys, Silas, barking orders. No one leaves this building until it passes, Silas said. Could be hours, could be days. We've got feed for the horses, water in the barrels, and enough supplies to wait it out. But they didn't have a doctor, and Martha's baby decided it was time to be born. The first contraction hit her at 4 in the afternoon, just as the wind began to howl like something alive and hungry. She gasped, doubled over, and Catherine caught her before she fell. "The baby," Martha whispered. "It's coming." Silas looked at Walker. Walker looked at Augustus Reed, the oldest cowboy who'd delivered calves and foals, but never a human child. "We need a doctor," Catherine said. "Nearest doctor is 40 miles, Silas said, "and in this storm he might as well be on the moon." Martha cried out again, louder this time. The sound cut through the howl of wind like a knife. Eleanor stepped forward. "I'll help." Everyone turned to look at her. "I worked in a field hospital," she said. "Hamburg, after the bombings. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen births. I've assisted." That was a lie. She'd seen birth once and the mother had died, but Martha needed help and there was no one else. Walker met her eyes. He knew she was lying. She could see it in his face, but he nodded anyway. "Tell us what you need." They set up in a corner of the barn as far from the horses as possible. Clean hay, blankets, water boiled on a small stove meant for warming the cowboys' coffee. Martha lay on a makeshift bed, her face pale and slick with sweat despite the cold. The contractions came faster. Martha screamed, and the sound mixed with the wind until Eleanor couldn't tell which was which. Hours passed. The storm raged. The temperature inside the barn dropped until their breath came out in clouds. Eleanor's hands shook, and not from the cold. "I can't," Martha gasped between contractions. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Eleanor said, though she wasn't sure. The baby was coming wrong. She could feel it. Breech maybe, or just too big. Something was wrong. Catherine held Martha's hand. Walker stood near the door watching, helpless. The other women huddled together, praying in German and English, and the wordless language of fear. At 3 in the morning, 19 hours after the first contraction, Martha stopped screaming. She looked at Eleanor with eyes that had already accepted death. "Promise me," she whispered, "if I die, you'll take care of him. My son. Promise." "You're not dying," Eleanor said. "Promise." Eleanor took her hand. "I promise." Martha nodded. Then she gathered what was left of her strength and pushed. The baby came in a rush of blood and fluid and tiny, impossible life. A boy, small and blue and utterly silent. Eleanor's heart stopped. She grabbed him, turned him over, cleared his mouth and nose with her fingers, the way she'd seen the nurse do in Hamburg. Nothing. She rubbed his back, his chest. Still nothing. "Please," she whispered. "Please." And then, as if he'd just been waiting for permission, the baby opened his mouth and screamed. The sound filled the barn. Martha sobbed. Catherine laughed through tears. Walker turned away, and Eleanor saw his shoulders shake. She wrapped the baby in a clean blanket and placed him on Martha's chest. Mother and son alive against all odds in a Texas barn, while a blizzard tried to tear the world apart. "What will you name him?" Eleanor asked. Martha looked down at her son. "James," she said, "after someone good who died too young." She looked at Walker, who'd turned back around. His face was wet. "If that's all right," Martha said. Walker nodded, unable to speak. The blizzard lasted 2 more days. Trapped in the barn, they survived on stories and songs and the kind of closeness that only shared danger can create. The cowboys told tales of rodeos and cattle drives and the time Augustus Reed rode a bull for 12 seconds and broke 3 ribs. The women told stories about Germany before the war, about cities that didn't exist anymore, about people who were gone. And on the second night, after everyone else had fallen asleep, Walker found Elena sitting with baby James while Martha rested. He sat down beside her without asking. For a long time, they just watched the infant sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling. "You lied," Walker said quietly, "about the hospital." Eleanor didn't deny it. Yes. You'd never delivered a baby before? No. He might have died. Yes. Walker was quiet. Then, thank you. Eleanor looked at him. In the lamplight, his face was all shadows and angles. My brother James, he said. The one I told you about. He died at Anzio, but I didn't tell you everything. He stared at the baby, not at her. He was 19. Wanted to be a teacher. Used to write letters home about the Italian kids, how they'd follow the soldiers around begging for chocolate. How they reminded him that people were just people, no matter which side drew the borders. Walker's voice cracked. His last letter he wrote about a German prisoner they'd captured. Kid maybe 17, scared out of his mind. James said the boy cried for his mother and James gave him water and a blanket and told him it would be okay. He looked at Elena now. 2 days later, a mortar shell killed James. They never even found all of him. Elena's throat closed. I hated that German boy, Walker said. Hated him for surviving when James didn't. Hated all of you. But then I think about what James would say. He'd say that boy didn't choose the war any more than we did. He'd say hate is easy and kindness is hard, and we should do the hard thing. He reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. James wrapped his fingers around Walker's thumb with surprising strength. This baby is named after my brother, and you saved him. You a German woman who wore the uniform I'm supposed to hate. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet. I don't know how to make sense of it, any of it, but I know James would tell me to let it go, so I'm trying. Eleanor didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Just sat there in the cold barn while the wind howled and a baby slept, and somewhere in the distance a war was still ending one person at a time. When morning came and the storm finally broke, they emerged from the barn to find the world transformed. 3 feet of snow covered everything. The sky was impossibly blue, the air so cold it hurt to breathe. They dug out slowly, methodically, cleared paths to the water, fed the horses and cattle, checked for losses. 3 calves had frozen, 2 sections of fence were down, but everyone, human and animal, had survived. That night Silas slaughtered a steer and they roasted it over an open fire. The meat was tough but hot, and they ate until they couldn't move. Someone produced a harmonica. Someone else sang a song in German that sounded like grief and gratitude mixed together. And Walker, who rarely drank, took a long pull from a bottle of whiskey Augustus had been saving and offered it to Elena. She drank. The liquor burned all the way down, and she was grateful for it. You ever wonder if any of this makes sense? Walker asked. They were sitting away from the others, watching the fire. What do you mean? You, me, this? He gestured at the ranch, the women, the whole improbable situation. Germans working Texas cattle because the war took all our men. Enemies becoming whatever we're becoming. I don't know what we're becoming, Elena said. Neither do I. He took another drink. But it feels like something. The fire crackled. In the distance, a coyote called. Eleanor looked at the flames, at Walker's profile in the firelight, at the vast Texas sky above them. She thought about saying it, about telling him that in the chaos of the delivery, in the moment when the baby finally breathed, she'd felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, she didn't deserve that, but maybe acceptance. Maybe the beginning of understanding that survival itself was a kind of grace. But the words wouldn't come. So instead, she took another drink from the bottle and handed it back. Whatever we're becoming, she said finally, it's better than what we were. Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. They sat in silence after that, passing the bottle back and forth until it was empty and the fire had burned down to embers and the cold had driven everyone else inside. Finally, Walker stood. He offered her his hand. Come on. Sun's up in 4 hours. Cattle don't feed themselves. She took his hand and let him pull her up. As they walked back toward the bunkhouse, Elena realized something. For the first time in months, she'd spent an entire evening without thinking about Hamburg, without seeing fire when she closed her eyes. without hearing the screams. Maybe that was healing, or maybe it was just survival. Either way, it was enough. March brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and Silas Hartwell announced the spring cattle drive 400 head from the winter pasture back to the North Range. "Same as before," he said. 20 miles, one day. But this time, you're not riding flank. You're riding swing with the regular hands." That meant responsibility. That meant trust. Elena rode Cinder. The mare was 5 years old now, in her prime, and they'd become something more than rider and horse. They were partners. Cinder knew what Elena needed before she asked. Elena could feel what Cinder was thinking through the tension in her muscles, the angle of her ears. The drive started well. Clear skies. Moderate temperature. The cattle moved smoothly, and by noon they'd covered half the distance. Then everything went wrong at once. A rattlesnake hidden in the brush. One of the lead steers stepped on it, got bit, panicked. The panic spread like fire through dry grass. Suddenly, 50 head were scattering in 3 directions, and the cowboys were shouting and horses were wheeling, and chaos descended like a flood. "Eleanor," Walker's voice cut through the noise. "Right flank. Turn them back." She didn't think, just acted. Cinder was already moving, cutting through the herd like a knife. Eleanor leaned left, and the mare went left. Leaned right, and they went right. She could feel the rhythm now. The conversation Walker had talked about months ago. Horse and rider, one creature, one purpose. They got in front of the lead runners. Cinder reared not high, just enough to make the cattle reconsider. The lead steer turned. The others followed. 10 minutes later, the herd was back together. One dead snake, one injured steer, but no losses. Silas rode over to where Eleanor sat on Cinder, breathing hard. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. Then, "You ride like you were born to it." It wasn't praise, just observation. But coming from Silas Hartwell, it meant everything. That night, camped under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Walker found her again. "I need to tell you something," he said. Elena looked up from the fire. "Next month there's a rodeo in Abilene, small regional thing, amateur cutting horse competition." "Okay. I think you should enter." Elena stared at him. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" "Walker, I've been riding for 6 months. Those people have been riding their whole lives. And you cut cattle better than riders I've known for 10 years. He sat down beside her. "Prize is $200. That's 5 months' wages. More importantly, it's a chance to show everyone what you can do." "What I can do?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm a German POW who works on a Texas ranch. What exactly do you think people will say when I show up?" "I think they'll say a lot of things, some of them ugly." Walker looked at her steadily. "But I also think you'll beat half of them, and that'll say something too." Elena shook her head. "It's insane." "Maybe." He stood. "But you've got 4 weeks to think about it." He walked away, leaving her alone with the fire and the stars and the wild, impossible idea that she might be good enough. The next 4 weeks blurred together. Elena practiced cutting every spare moment. Walker coached her, quiet and patient, correcting tiny flaws in her position, her timing, her communication with Cinder. "You're gripping too tight with your knees," he'd say. "Relax, let her move." Or, "You're anticipating. The cow hasn't committed yet. Wait for it." The other cowboys watched, some with skepticism, some with grudging respect. Augustus Reed, who'd been riding for 40 years, shook his head one afternoon and said, "Damn if she ain't got the touch." And slowly, Eleanor began to believe she might actually be able to do this. The morning they left for Abilene, Martha brought baby James out to see them off. He was 2 months old now, healthy and loud, and utterly oblivious to the miracle of his survival. "Ride well," Martha said. "Make us proud." Elena looked at this woman who'd nearly died, who'd named her son after Walker's dead brother, who'd become something like a sister. "I'll try," Elena said. "Don't try," Martha said, smiling. "Just ride." The rodeo grounds were chaos. Horses everywhere, cowboys in their best shirts and newest hats, families spread out on blankets, children running wild, the smell of roasting meat and dust and competition. Elena signed up at the registration table. The man behind it looked at her name, looked at her and frowned. "You ain't from around here?" "No, sir." "Where you from?" Elena hesitated. Then, "Germany." The man's expression hardened. "We don't want no Germans here." Walker stepped forward. "She works Hartwell Ranch. She's sponsored legal, and she's paid her entry fee same as everyone else." The man looked like he wanted to argue, but there were people waiting in line behind them, and making a scene would be worse than letting one German woman compete. "Fine," he muttered, "but don't expect any favors." They walked away. Elena's hands were shaking. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "Yes," Walker said. "You should." The competition started at noon. 23 riders. Elena drew lot number 19 close to the end, which meant watching everyone else first. She watched them all. Good riders, great riders, men who moved like they'd been born in the saddle. The current leader, a cocky cowboy named Travis, scored 87 points with a run so clean it drew applause from the whole crowd. Then it was Elena's turn. She walked Cinder into the arena. The crowd, which had been noisy, went silent. She could feel their eyes, could hear the whispers. "That's the German girl. What's she doing here? This ought to be good." Elena took a breath, looked at the herd of cattle at the far end, looked at Walker standing at the fence, who nodded once. Then she let Cinder loose. The mare knew what to do. She'd been bred for this, trained for this, born for this. Elena just had to stay out of her way and let the conversation happen. Cinder locked onto the target cow, number 14, young and fast. Cut left. The cow went right. Cinder anticipated, blocked. The cow tried left. Cinder was already there. Back and forth, a dance that looked like fighting, until the cow was separated from the herd and had nowhere to go but where Cinder wanted it to go. 18 seconds. Clean separation. Perfect control. Elena rode out of the arena to absolute silence. Then slowly someone started clapping, then another person, then more. Not everyone, maybe not even half, but enough. The judge, an old ex-army colonel who'd seen Dachau with his own eyes, looked at his scorecard for a long time. Then he wrote 91, first place. Elena sat on Cinder in the dust, unable to process what had just happened. Walker was there, suddenly grinning wider than she'd ever seen. "Told you," he said. The prize ceremony was awkward. Half the crowd cheered, the other half was silent or hostile. Travis, the second-place finisher, shook her hand with a grip just short of painful. "Hell of a ride," he said, grudging but real. The judge handed her the $200 check and the blue ribbon. She stared at them like they might disappear. "I liberated a camp," the judge said quietly, so only she could hear. "Saw things no human should see. I wanted to hate you. Wanted to throw you out of this competition." He paused. "But that ride was honest, and hate can't touch honest work." He walked away, leaving her standing there with proof that she was more than her past, more than her uniform, more than her mistakes. She was a rider, and she'd earned it. On the drive back to the ranch, Walker was quiet. Finally, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, he said, "You know what today was? A rodeo." "No, it was the day you stopped being a prisoner. You're free now, Elena. Really free." She looked at him. At this man who'd taught her to ride, who'd sat with her in the cold, who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not what I was. Who I could be." Walker was quiet for a long moment. "That's all any of us can do," he said finally. "See each other. Really see each other. Past the uniforms and flags and all the rest of it." The ranch appeared in the distance, lights glowing warm against the gathering dark. "Welcome home," Walker said. And for the first time since Hamburg burned, Eleanor believed that might actually be true. The $200 prize money sat in Elena's bunk for 3 days before she decided what to do with it. She could have saved it, could have bought better boots or a new saddle, or put it toward the truck she'd been dreaming about. Instead, she gave half to Martha for baby James. The other half she split among the families of the women who hadn't made the visa list money sent to Germany to mothers and sisters who were still hungry. Walker asked her why. "Because I got lucky," she said, "and luck should be shared." He didn't argue, just nodded and went back to work. That was April 1949. By summer, Elena had forgotten about the ribbon gathering dust in her footlocker. The work mattered more than the prize. It always had. The years after the rodeo blurred together in the way years do when you've found work that matters and a place that feels like home. 1950. Elena turned 24, working cattle in the North Range. Katrine married a neighboring rancher's son and changed her name to Catherine, though she never changed who she was. Martha's son, James, learned to walk, stumbling around the ranch house like a tiny drunk man, bringing laughter to places that hadn't heard it in years. 1951. Elena saved enough money to buy a used Ford truck. It was 15 years old and sounded like a dying animal, but it was hers. Bought with money she'd earned, not stolen, not given, earned. 1952. A drought hit. Cattle died. 3 neighboring ranches went under. But Silas Hartwell had Elena now, and Elena knew how to read the land. She found water sources the old-timers had forgotten, rotated pastures in patterns that seemed insane until they worked. The ranch lost 12 head. Everyone else lost hundreds. 1953. Walker taught her to rope in competition. Not just cutting, but calf roping, team roping, all the skills that separated amateurs from professionals. Her hands, once soft from sorting propaganda mail in Hamburg, became permanently scarred and permanently strong. But it was 1952 when everything changed. Augustus Reed, the oldest cowboy, the one who'd delivered Martha's baby and taught Eleanor to check fence lines and told stories that could make you laugh or cry, depending on his mood, died in his sleep at 67. Heart gave out. Peaceful. The kind of death every cowboy hoped for. Silas gathered everyone in the main hall the day after the funeral. "Gus was the best foreman I ever had," he said. His voice was rough-aged by cigarettes and wind and 67 years of hard living. "He knew this land better than I do, knew the cattle, knew the horses, knew how to make a ranch run." He paused, looking around at the assembled hands. 8 cowboys, 15 women who'd started as prisoners and become something else. "I'm making Eleanor Fisher the new foreman of the North Range." The silence that followed was absolute. 3 of the older cowboys stood up and walked out. Just like that. No words, no argument, just gone. Walker didn't move. Neither did the younger hands. They'd worked with Elena for 7 years now. They'd seen what she could do. Silas continued as if nothing had happened. "She'll manage the north 40,000 acres, 3,000 head of cattle, rotation schedules, breeding decisions, personnel." He looked at Elena. $65 a month. You've earned it." Eleanor stood there, unable to speak. Foreman. A position she'd never even dreamed of wanting, because wanting things was still dangerous, still felt like tempting fate. "Sir," she managed finally. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Silas said. "Just do the job." The next 6 months were the hardest of her professional life. The remaining cowboys tested her constantly, not with open defiance that would have gotten them fired, but with subtle resistance, taking longer on tasks, questioning decisions, waiting to see if she'd break. She didn't break. When they questioned her rotation schedule, she showed them the math. When they doubted her breeding choices, she showed them the bloodline records. When they tested her authority, she outworked them. First one in the saddle, last one to quit. By fall, they stopped testing. By winter, they respected her. And by spring of 1953, when the new calves came in 20% heavier than the previous years, even the old-timers in town admitted grudgingly over whiskey in dark bars that the German woman knew what she was doing. But success didn't erase the past. Nothing could. May 1953. Elena was in the ranch office reviewing breeding records when Walker brought her a letter. Forwarded from the POW processing center. Postmarked Hamburg. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was written in German in careful handwriting. Not her mother's, not her father's, someone else. She read it once, then again, then a third time, though the words never changed. Dear Fräulein Fischer, my name is Frau Hoffmann. I was your mother's neighbor on Friedrichstrasse before the war. I am writing to fulfill a promise I made to her. Your mother Anna died on February 4th, 1946. Starvation. The doctor said her heart simply gave out, but we both know it was hunger that killed her. Her last words were, Eleanor lives free in Texas. She escaped. She is safe. Your father Ernst died in Dachau concentration camp in 1943. The Gestapo arrested him for hiding Jewish families in your building's cellar. He was tortured for information. He gave them nothing. Before your mother died, she asked me to tell you something if I ever had the chance. You did nothing wrong. The war was not your fault. Live well. That is how you honor the dead. I hope this letter finds you. I hope you have found peace. With sympathy, Frau Hoffmann. Eleanor sat very still. The letter trembled in her hands, but she didn't cry. She'd cried all her tears years ago in a barn during a blizzard in a corral after falling from a horse in the darkness of the bunkhouse when she thought no one could hear. Now there were no tears left, just a hollow space where they used to be. Her mother had died February 4th, 1946. 2 days after Elena had eaten Christmas leftovers, roast beef and potatoes and fresh bread. 2 days after she'd slept in a warm bed and woken to coffee and bacon. She'd been eating while her mother starved, sleeping warm while her mother froze, living while her mother died. The mathematics of guilt were precise and unforgiving. Walker found her an hour later still sitting in the same position, still holding the letter. He didn't ask what it said, just poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her, and sat down. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Elena spoke. Her voice was steady, empty, factual. My mother died in February 1946. Starvation. My father died in Dachau in 1943. Tortured for hiding Jews. Walker's hand tightened on his cup. My father was a hero, she continued. He saved lives, he died for it, and I wore the uniform of the people who killed him. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have asked more questions. I should have. You were 17, Walker interrupted, and hungry and scared. What were you supposed to do? Something else, she said. Anything else. And then you'd be dead too. Maybe that would have been better. Walker set his cup down hard enough to slosh coffee onto the desk. Don't say that. Don't ever say that. Why not? It's true. Because it's not. He leaned forward. Your mother's last words were that you escaped, that you were safe. She died knowing you survived. That probably brought her more peace than anything else could have. Elena shook her head. You don't understand. No, Walker agreed. I don't. My brother died in combat. That's different than starvation. Different than the camps, I know that. He paused. But I know what it's like to be alive when someone you love isn't. To eat when they can't. To laugh when they never will again. And I know that making yourself miserable doesn't honor them. It just adds one more casualty to the war. Eleanor looked at him. This man who'd lost his brother, who'd chosen kindness over hate, who'd taught her to ride and never asked for anything in return. How do you live with it? She asked. The guilt. Honestly, Walker said. I don't know. Some days better than others. Some days I wake up and I'm fine. Some days I wake up and I want to burn the whole world down because James isn't in it. He picked up his coffee again. But then I get up and I get on my horse, and I do the work, because the work needs doing, and because doing the work is the only thing that makes sense when nothing else does. Elena nodded slowly. She understood that, had lived it for 7 years now.
Your mother told you to live well, Walker said. So live well, be good at what you do, help people when you can, treat the animals right. That's how you honor the dead, not by dying with them. He stood up, leaving his half-finished coffee on the desk. Take the day off. Hell, take a week. Ride out somewhere and think. But then come back. We need you. He left. Eleanor sat alone with the letter and the coffee and the weight of a mother's death 2,000 miles away and 7 years too late to fix. Then she folded the letter carefully, put it in her pocket, and went to find Cinder. She rode for 3 days. Rode until the North Range ended and the unfenced prairie began. Rode until she couldn't remember if she was running from something or toward it. Slept under stars that didn't care about wars or borders or the arbitrary divisions people drew between enemy and friend. On the 3rd day, she stopped at a creek, let Cinder drink, sat on the bank and watched the water flow past, constant and indifferent. And she made a choice. She couldn't change the past, couldn't bring her mother back, couldn't undo the uniform she'd worn or the system she'd been complicit in, however unwillingly. But she could choose what came next. She could be bitter and broken and let the guilt consume her until there was nothing left but ash. Or she could do what her mother had asked, live well, do good work, be useful instead of harmful. It wasn't redemption. She didn't believe in redemption. The past couldn't be redeemed, only survived. But survival was something. Survival and useful work, and treating animals with gentleness and teaching young riders without humiliation. It was enough. It had to be. She rode back to the ranch on the 4th day. Walker was waiting on the porch like he'd known she'd come back. "Ready to work?" he asked. "Yes," she said. And that was that. The years continued. 1954, 1955, 1956. Eleanor became more than a foreman. She became a fixture. When people in town talked about Hartwell Ranch, they talked about the German woman who could cut cattle better than anyone in 3 counties. Some still said it with contempt, others with respect, most with a mixture of both. 1958 brought drought again. Worse this time. The land cracked. Water sources dried up. Cattle stood in the shade and waited to die. But Eleanor had learned. She'd built relationships with neighboring ranches, trading water access for labor. She'd kept detailed records of which pastures recovered fastest. She'd drilled wells the old-timers said were useless. The wells struck water. Hartwell Ranch lost 30 head. Everyone else lost triple that. And one night in October, Silas Hartwell called Eleanor to his office. He looked old now, 70 years weathered into his face, his hands shaking slightly when he poured whiskey into 2 glasses. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He pushed a glass toward her. She took it. "I'm dying," he said. No preamble, no softening, just fact. Elena's stomach dropped. "Lung cancer. Doctor says 6 months, maybe. I've been smoking since I was 12. Stupid way to die, but there it is." He drank his whiskey in one swallow. "My nephew Garrett inherits the ranch. He's a lawyer. Never worked cattle a day in his life. Probably sell the whole thing within 5 years. Sir, let me finish." Silas refilled his glass. "I can't stop him from inheriting. It's in my will and I don't have time to fight that fight. But I can make sure you're protected." He pulled out a document. Legal papers typed and official. "I'm writing into the will that you're foreman for life. $65 a month plus 5% profit share. Garrett can't fire you, can't reduce your pay, can't touch you." Elena stared at the papers. "Why?" she asked. Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because you're the best rancher in 3 counties. Because I watched you turn from a scared girl into a woman who saved this ranch in 2 droughts. Because my son Thomas would have liked you." He paused, and his expression changed, became something harder, sadder. And because I need to tell you the truth about something. Eleanor waited. Thomas's last letter, the one I told you about where he said Germans were just scared kids like us. I lied. The world tilted. He never wrote that, Silas continued. His voice was steady, but his hands shook worse now. His last letter said, "Kill every German you see. They're animals. Don't show mercy, because they won't." Eleanor couldn't breathe. I wanted to do what he said. For 6 months, I wanted it so bad I could taste it. But then the government offered me a deal, take POWs as labor or lose the ranch. And I thought, if I say no, if I choose hate, then I'm the animal. Not you, me. He looked at her directly. So I lied, to myself, to you, to everyone. I made up a version of my son who was kinder than he was, who saw humanity in his enemies, because I needed to believe that was possible. Tears ran down his weathered face. An old man crying for a son who'd been dead 13 years. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I used you to absolve my own guilt. I'm sorry for all of it." Eleanor sat very still. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do. She reached across the desk and took his hand. "You gave me life when you wanted me dead," she said. "You could have been cruel. You chose patience instead. That's not absolution. That's grace." Silas gripped her hand hard. "Forgiveness isn't real," he said, echoing words he'd told her years ago. "It's just choosing to be tired of hating. And I'm so tired, Elena, so goddamn tired." "I know," she said. "Me too." They sat like that for a long time. Two people who'd been enemies by definition, who'd lost more than anyone should have to lose, who'd chosen exhaustion over hate, and found something like peace on the other side. Silas died in January 1959, peacefully in his sleep with Walker and Elena sitting vigil beside his bed. His last words were to Walker, "Take care of the ranch and her." Walker promised. The funeral was well attended. Ranchers from 5 counties, cowboys who'd worked for Silas over 40 years, the 15 women who'd stayed, now all American citizens, now all successful in their own right. And Eleanor, who'd never cried at her own mother's death, cried at his. After the funeral, after Garrett, the nephew had shaken hands and made promises he wouldn't keep, and driven back to Austin. Eleanor found herself alone in the barn with Cinder. The mare was 14 now, grey around the muzzle, slower than she'd been, but still game, still willing. Elena stroked her neck, feeling the warmth, the solid reality of living muscle and bone. "We've been together a long time, girl," she said. 13 years. More than half your life. Cinder nuzzled her shoulder. "I came here expecting to die. Instead I learned to ride. Instead I became a foreman. Instead I found—" She trailed off. "I don't know what to call it. Not redemption, not forgiveness. Just a second chance." Walker's voice came from behind her. "Is that enough?" She turned. He was standing in the doorway, backlit by late afternoon sun, and she realized with a shock that he was 40 now. They'd both gotten older without noticing. "Yes," she said. "It's enough." Walker walked closer. "Elena, I need to ask you something." "Okay." He seemed to gather his courage. "Will you stay, not just on the ranch, with me?" She stared at him. "I know I'm not much," he said quickly. "I'm just a cowboy. Never owned land. Never will. But I've loved you since that first day when you fell 4 times and got back on. And I've been too much of a coward to say it." Elena's heart broke and healed in the same moment. "Walker." "You don't have to answer now," he interrupted. "Just think about it. We could build a life. Small, maybe. Simple. But ours. She looked at this man who'd taught her to ride, who'd sat with her during blizzards and grief, who'd never asked her to be anything but herself. And she realized with terrible clarity that she loved him too, had loved him for years probably. But love was dangerous. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant admitting she deserved happiness, and she'd never been able to believe that. "Walker," she said carefully, "you are the best man I've ever known. You taught me to ride. You sat with me when I cried over bacon. You never asked me to be anything but myself." She paused, choosing her words with the care they deserved. "But I can't marry you." His face fell, but he nodded. "Okay. Not because I don't love you. I do. More than you know." He looked up sharply. "But because I'm not a woman who deserves a husband. I'm a woman who wore the uniform of evil, who ate well while her mother starved, who lived while 6 million died. Elena, I'll stay on this ranch until I die," she continued. "I'll work beside you every day, but I can't be your wife. I can only be what I am, a cowgirl who once was a prisoner." Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I wait until you're ready?" "Don't wait. I'll never be ready." "Then I'll wait anyway." And he did. For the next 54 years, Walker Kane waited. He never married, never even looked at another woman. He worked beside Elena every day, respected her boundaries, and loved her from a distance that hurt less as time made it familiar. The years blurred together in the beautiful, terrible way that years do. 1960, 1970, 1980, 1910. The ranch changed hands twice. Garrett sold it in 1965 to a consortium. The consortium sold it to a family in 1982. But Elena stayed protected by Silas's ironclad will, doing the work she'd learned to love. She trained over 600 riders. She broke horses and mended fences and delivered calves at midnight and became a legend without meaning to. Walker worked beside her, never left, never complained, just showed up every day and did the work and loved her quietly. In 1989, Elena sat in the ranch house and watched the Berlin Wall fall on a television that still seemed like magic. She was 63 years old. Her hands were permanently scarred. Her body was mapped with injuries earned over 44 years of ranch work. And when the wall came down, when people danced in streets she'd never see again, she whispered, "Mama, it's over." Walker, sitting beside her, heard. He didn't say anything, just put his hand on her shoulder and left it there. The years continued. 2000. 2001. The world changed in ways both miraculous and terrible. Men walked on the moon. Computers fit in pockets. Wars started and ended and started again. But on Hartwell Ranch, some things stayed the same. Cattle still needed tending. Horses still needed riding. Fences still needed mending. And Elena Fisher still woke up every morning, got on a horse and did the work. In 2010, at age 84, she still rode. Slower now, gentler, but she rode. Walker, 90 years old and stubborn as ever, rode beside her. They'd become the oldest working cowboys in Texas, possibly in America. Newspapers wanted to interview them. Television wanted to film them. They declined every request. The work was enough, had always been enough. One spring morning in 2013, Eleanor sat on the ranch house porch with Walker. They'd just finished breakfast, coffee and toast because their stomachs couldn't handle bacon anymore, though they both missed it. A little girl appeared around the corner of the barn. 8 years old, Walker's great niece visiting for spring break. She'd been learning to ride. Sarah, her name was. Bright-eyed and fearless and absolutely terrible at staying in the saddle. "Miss Eleanor," she called, "can you watch me ride?" Eleanor smiled. "Of course." They walked to the corral. Sarah mounted a patient old mare named Daisy, made it about 30 seconds before falling off. She hit the dirt hard, lay there for a moment stunned. Elena helped her up. "It hurts," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "I know," Elena said. "I fell 23 times my first week." "Really? Really?" She brushed dust off the girl's shoulder. Want to know the secret? What? Every time I got back on, I thought about my mother. She survived 3 years of starvation so I could live. I could survive a sore tailbone. She looked at Sarah seriously. Falling doesn't make you weak. Not getting back up does. Sarah considered this. Then she walked back to the horse and climbed on. This time she stayed on for a full minute. When she dismounted, grinning with triumph, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in 70 years. Not hope. Hope was still too dangerous, but something adjacent to it. The sense that the work continued, that what she'd learned she could pass on, that maybe in some small way she'd made things better instead of worse. That night, Elena and Walker sat on the porch and watched the sunset. They did this most nights now. There wasn't much else to do when you were 87 and 93 and had already done everything that needed doing. You ever regret staying? Walker asked. It was a question he asked sometimes, like he needed to confirm the answer hadn't changed. Every day I think about what I lost, Elena said. The answer was always the same. Every day I'm grateful for what I found. They sat in comfortable silence. In the corral, Sarah was practicing mounting and dismounting, determined to master it before bed. 68 years, Walker said quietly. You've been here 68 years. Seems longer, Elena said. Seems like yesterday. Both, she agreed. The sun touched the horizon, turning the sky the color of fire and blood and beauty. Walker, Elena said. Yeah, thank you. For what? For waiting, even though I asked you not to. He smiled. Somebody had to. They watched the last of the light fade, watched the stars begin to appear one by one, filling the Texas sky with the same cold fire they'd burned with 70 years ago when Eleanor first arrived, expecting death and finding something else entirely. I need to tell you something, Elena said. Walker turned to look at her. When I die, and it won't be long now, we both know that I want to be buried here, on the ranch, not in Hamburg, not in Germany. Here. Okay. And I want my tombstone to say just one thing. What? She could ride. Walker smiled, but his eyes were wet. That all? That's enough. They sat together until full dark. Then Walker helped her up her knees, didn't work like they used to, and they walked inside together, two old people who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Elena Fisher died in her sleep on May 3rd, 2013. She was 87 years old. Heart failure. Peaceful. The kind of death every cowboy hoped for. Walker found her in the morning. She looked like she was sleeping. In her hand was a folded piece of paper, the letter from Frau Hoffmann, 60 years old, and read so many times the creases had nearly split it apart. The funeral was well attended. Ranchers from 8 counties, 600 riders she'd trained over the years. The 15 original women now, 12-3, having passed, all in their 80s now, all successful, all carrying flowers. They buried her on a hill overlooking the North Range. The grave marker was simple granite with simple words. Eleanor Fisher, 1926 to 2013. She could ride. But that night, after everyone had left, Walker returned with a chisel and a steady hand despite his age. Below her epitaph, he added one more line, and she taught us all how. 4 months later, Walker Kane died in his sleep at age 93. Some said it was heart failure. Others said he'd just been waiting to follow her. They buried him beside Elena, facing the same sunrise they'd watched together for 68 years. And on quiet mornings when the wind blows just right across the Texas plains, you can almost hear it. The sound of hoofbeats. 2 riders checking fence lines, doing the work that never ends living well, because living well was the only way to honor the dead. Sometimes mercy is just exhaustion. Sometimes kindness is just practicality. Sometimes forgiveness is just people deciding the cost of hate is too high and they're too damn tired to keep paying it. But whatever the reason, the result is the same. You get on the horse, you fall, you get back on. And eventually, if you're lucky, if you're stubborn, if you're willing to let go of the fight, you find your seat. Eventually, you and the horse become one thing. Eventually, you're not a prisoner anymore. Eventually, you're just a rider.